Here's what's coming up on the world today. Israel intensifies attacks on Gaza as conflict escalates. President Vladimir Putin says Russia will respond to Ukraine's cleansing of political space. Plus, Greece ends lockdown measures, opens to tourists despite COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani, but we begin with the news just in. 12 people, we understand, attending Friday prayers in Kabul in Afghanistan have been killed following a bombing at a mosque on the outskirts of the Afghan capital. Police say the blast in Shakadara district came on the second day of a three-day Taliban and army ceasefire to mark the Eid festival at the end of Ramadan. No one has said they were behind the bombing, which is also wounded at least 15 people, but the Taliban has denied involvement. On Thursday, blasts in Kandahar and Kunduz provinces killed 9 people, but today's bomb blast is the most major of the violent incidents that have marred the ceasefire. The imam leading the prayers was also among the dead. It comes less than a week after scores of people, many of them students, were killed in a bombing outside a school in Kabul, with at least 165 people injured. We're now in the Middle East, where Israel is intensifying its assault on Gaza. It comes as Palestinian militants continue to fire rockets into Israel on the 5th day of hostilities. Israel's military says air and ground forces are involved in today's attacks, but have not entered Gaza. Some 119 people have been killed so far in Gaza, 8 in Israel since fighting began on Monday.
The Israeli military has begun air and ground attacks against Gaza following an unprecedented assault unleashed by Israel's military on the Gaza Strip on Thursday night. A statement from the Israeli military says that before midnight, its forces struck Gaza with airstrikes and artillery as rockets from the Palestinian enclave continued to be fired towards Israel. The armed wing of Hamas, known as Al-Qassam brigades and other less influential militant groups, fired 150 barrages of rockets from the Gaza Strip into Israel. Within several minutes of the assault, Israeli military fired 150 bombs, striking different targets in various places off the Gaza Strip. Hamas says it will respond to Israeli attacks with more rockets. Meanwhile, the Palestinian government has not made any response to the new round of Israeli military attacks. This comes amid international efforts to broker a truce between Israel and Hamas in the most severe flare-up of conflicts between the two sides since 2014.
We are deeply concerned with the loss of life among civilians, especially among children. Palestinians have a right to live in security and to live in peace, just as Israelis do. And so we are working hard to encourage all sides to stand down, to de-escalate, to return to calm.
In the face of serious escalation of the situation between Israel and Palestine in years, Egypt has reportedly offered Israel a one-year agreement for a ceasefire as part of mediation between Israel and Hamas, but Israel is yet to respond. And this comes after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his cabinet Wednesday night that Israel had officially rejected a ceasefire proposal with Hamas. The latest wave of violent clashes between Israel and the Palestinians was mainly sparked by an Israeli plan to evict some Palestinian families from a neighborhood in the disputed East Jerusalem.
Let's get some perspective on the issue. Director General of the Bolitac Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Professor Bola Akitarewa, joins us now. He's in Yaba. Professor, thank you for making time to be with us on the program. Despite calls for de-escalation of the conflict, as we've heard from many international partners, Israel is stepping up its attacks on Gaza. What can be done at this point to resolve the crisis?
I think we can look at the issue from four angles. The first one is for both sides to recognize the need for mutual existence. The moment Israel, the Arab world in general, do not recognize the fact that they both have right to existence, then it will be a problem that will remain. The second issue is that there is the need to change the strategy from being conflict management to conflict resolution. What is generally being done now is to manage the crisis and the conflict rather than seeking an ultimate enduring solution to it. A third approach to it is that it is not possible for the United States to have partisan interest and still want to be a mediator. That is not workable. A mediator must not have any bias for any particular person or state in dispute. More significantly, I think that there is the need for both parties to reckon with the numerous resolutions already adopted by the United Nations Security Council. If we are able to go along that spirit of the resolutions, I think we can be dreaming, and rightly too, of a possible end to the misunderstanding.
I don't know if you've observed, these international partners, the US, the UK, even the United Nations, they're all calling for an end to the hostilities between the two, but nobody really is wading in the water here to try to stop this. So we heard the Egyptian, in the reports just before this interview, Egypt offering, a deal with Israel in order for the airstrikes to stop. What do you make of President Joe Biden's position on this matter? Because he spoke yesterday about it, and the only thing he said was he'd spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he's hoping that, this would end soon.
Well, I think that we can explain his position from three perspectives. The first perspective is that his position is quite consistent with the United Nations stand, which is to have, two states. We have a state of Israel and state for Palestine. So in this case, he will be right. The second perspective is that, look, his position is just protecting the national interest, nothing more than that. Because in this case, as I will link this one to the third perspective, now the Biden administration wants to shift emphasis from Middle East to China, that China has become more of a strategic interest than the Middle East. In the Middle East, the United States is having difficulty in identifying, in having a reliable, mark the word, reliable partner on which to, depend. So in this case, Israel and the Palestinians, they do not have any credible person that they can rely on. The US now believes that, look, in this case, if you look at Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, the first day, the second day, not later than that, they normally appoint someone or make a statement on the issue of this Israelo-Arab conflict. But what Joe Biden has done in this particular case is to say, look, the Israelis have the right to legitimate self-defense. But in this case, when you look at the critical problem, he's also supporting the Arabs by saying two-state solution. So in this case, this ambivalent position is safer. Joe Biden is trying to be the friend of everyone and not an enemy to any one of them. So this is a strategic, diplomatic stance which is commendable.
Yes, Professor, and indeed you did point out that there is mistrust of the United States in the Middle East because of so many activities with President Trump, and then now President Joe Biden planning scheduling the pull-out of American troops from Afghanistan and many parts of the Middle East. So thank you again for sharing your thoughts and your analysis on the show.
Thank you.
We move on to Russia now, as President Vladimir Putin says his government will respond to what he calls Ukraine's cleansing of political space, a day after a Ukrainian court placed a prominent pro-Russian political official under house arrest. The Ukrainian court put Viktor Medvedchuk, who promotes closer ties with Moscow and says Putin is godfather to his daughter, under house arrest in connection to allegations of treason that he faces. He was notified this week that he is suspected of treason and attempting to plunder national wealth in Crimea, a part of Ukraine which Russia annexed in 2014. He says the charges are trumped up to silence his criticism of government policy. Relations between Moscow and Kiev have increasingly tense in recent months, with Russia having massed additional troops near the border and the two countries trading blame for a collapse in the ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. Meanwhile, a court in Italy has ruled that Matteo Salvini, the head of the country's right-wing League party, should not stand trial of allegations he kidnapped a group of migrants by refusing to let them disembark from a ship. A case centered on an incident in July 2019 when Salvini, then Interior Minister, blocked more than 100 people aboard the Gregoretti, Coast Guard ship for 6 days as he waited for European allies to agree to resettle them. The Catania case is similar to a separate investigation in the Sicilian capital of Palermo over migrants who were kept aboard another boat a month after Gregoretti incident. However, in a completely contrasted decision, a judge in Palermo last month ordered that Salvini should stand trial over the allegations, so he could face up to 15 years in prison if found guilty. The trial will begin on September 15. And the world must act now to slow global warming, otherwise there will be a climate catastrophe. So says COP26 President Alok Sharma. Mr. Sharma, Britain's former business minister and a member of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's cabinet, asked that immediate action must be taken to avoid more frequent and more brutal effects of pollution. This year, Britain hosts the COP26 climate conference in Scotland's largest city and will welcome back the United States under President Joe Biden. His predecessor, remember, Donald Trump, previously withdrew the U.S. from December 2015's Paris Agreement on Climate Change, which was adopted at the conclusion of the COP21 summit in the French capital, Paris.
Human activity is damaging our Earth. It's imperiling this brilliant jewel. The greenhouse gases that we've been pumping into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution are altering nature's precious balance, disrupting the finely tuned and fantastically complex system that is the world's climate. And the effects are now closing in. Global temperatures are rising. Last year was the hottest on record. The last decade was the hottest ever recorded. And in the past 30 years, the world has lost up to half its coral reefs. Half. We've seen wildfires in the Pennines and floods in West Lothian, all as pollution chokes our children. And if we do not act now, the science tells us these effects will become more frequent and more brutal. That we will witness a scale of global catastrophe, the likes of which the world has not seen. And quite rightly, future generations will hold us responsible.
In March this year, U.S. President Joe Biden introduced his $2 trillion plan to rebuild infrastructure and reshape the economy. President Biden's plan is making a particular case for investments that are resilient and will build adaptive infrastructure. Our correspondent Ayola Kasim in this report takes a look at how this will help disadvantaged communities in the U.S.
Freeway, right, that destroyed our community and is still killing people today.
Crosstown Freeway in Stockton, California was constructed in the 1970s, displacing what was once the largest population of Filipinos outside of the Philippines. Today, many residents of Little Manila suffer from different respiratory illnesses. Diagnosed with asthma at 8, Carlin Francisco grew up thinking everyone had it.
I grew up in school with like everyone having asthma. It was not like something rare for everyone. So I was like, oh, I have it. You know, that's like I'm like everyone else now.
When California began making environmental data available through an online mapping tool, Carlin and others in her Filipino immigrant community realized their chronically underinvested community, Little Manila, suffered high air pollution and groundwater contamination. It also suffered some of the state's highest poverty and unemployment rates.
With a lot of the inequities coming from the crosstown freeway, pollution burden, and a lot of environmental factors such as the port, a lot of industry, polluters, really creating hard breathing conditions here in South Stockton.
Places like Little Manila across the United States fall within President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan that targets 40% of the benefits of climate and clean investment to disadvantaged communities.
I think we need to make sure that people understand that the investments that we're making and the strategies we're making, working with, not counter to states and local governments, but supporting their efforts directly, is going to be a way of showing people that a shift to climate change, in a shift to investing in climate resilient infrastructure is not just essential, but it's beneficial today. It will put people back to work. It will keep your kids healthy. It is a way to hand them a future that we can all be proud of.
With the news comes some hope. Hope that the mapping tool will not just tell a story about why hospital ER visits for asthma were 2.4 times more frequent in neighborhoods like Little Manila, but will also help change the trend.
And so we can find all the maps and all the data in the world, but if we don't give power and resources to the people that are being injured by this history, then we're just, we're highlighting a problem and not doing anything about it.
It is not the area in which I think we're going to fight about the investments. All we're going to do is make sure that they're bold enough and big enough to meet this moment in time. So I'm very hopeful that this is not a point of contention, but it is really just a point of continuing to invest in our country again and what we need to keep our kids healthy and our future safe.
For now, Carlin has started avoiding outdoor sports and instead practicing indoor volleyball with the expectation that someday soon the community will be clean and they can be whole again. Ayola Kasim reporting for Channels Television News.
We have more coming up from the United States. White House Republicans have voted to elevate Representative Ellie Stefanik to the number 3 leadership position of conference chair after ousting Representative Liz Cheney from the role following her repeatedly calling out former President Donald Trump's big lie that the 2020 election was stolen. Stefanik, a high-profile Trump defender, faces a conservative challenger, or rather faced a conservative challenger, GOP Representative Chip Roy, but his candidacy was viewed as a long shot, and she was widely anticipated to win. The New York Congresswoman has had the backing of the House GOP leader, Kevin McCarthy, Whip Stephen Scillis, and, of course, former President Donald Trump. Channels Television's Washington correspondent Maria Bird has been monitoring events on the ground. Maria, why was it necessary for House Republicans to replace Liz Cheney, and why did it have to happen now?
It was critical and key for House Republicans to do this at this time. When you look at what's happening with the Republican Party, when you look and see how it's really has changed and evolved over the last 5 to 7 years, and you see so many of the Republicans are in support of former President Trump. And if you look at what Liz Cheney has been saying and her anti-support of the president's rhetoric regarding the elections were false, the elections were stolen, and she has been very much against that. And so if you look at where the Republican Party and most of where its constituencies are made up of now, they are very much opposite of her belief system as it relates to former President Trump. And so House Republicans were not going to continue to have someone that was basically, pounding on them and stating that they were wrong and that they needed to change as a party. And so they moved forward with changing that. And so I think that that is really ruffling the Republican Party as a whole and the tradition of the Republican Party.
So Liz Cheney's words and her anti-party activities must have delighted Democrats in the House. How does her exit now impact on the House with her gone and being replaced with Ellis Stefanik?
This replacement for her is, someone that is obviously of the belief system of former President Trump. I mean, she was a strong supporter. She's stating that we must, down with the days of socialism and the Democratic Party. She's claiming the Democratic agenda is based on the socialist ideologies. And so it's really much more in line with many of those new comers, those freshman Republicans and those who are sophomore year and, who are newer to the House. And so that is really where she's going to find her support. The real question is Liz Cheney going to be able to be even more impactful in bringing the country together once she leaves her role? And so that is what you're probably going to begin to see. You're going to begin to see you saw former President Bush spoke out in support of the Republican Party going back to where it used to be and a little hard on some of the new ideologies of the Republican Party. And so you're going to begin to potentially even see her impact being greater once she leaves this role as the third seat chair for the Republican Party.
All right, Maria, thanks for bringing us up to speed. We'll keep monitoring this story. And of course, we're reaching out to you. Thanks again. Greece has launched its tourist season, lifting most remaining restrictions on movement despite reporting an average of 2,000 COVID-19 cases daily. Well, German tourists have begun flying in, and from May 17th, it will no longer be illegal for Britons to travel to amber-list Greece, but they are advised not to. Here's a global update.
Museums across Greece reopened on Friday on the eve of the formal start of the country's tourist season, one of its most important economic sectors that has taken a hit from the coronavirus. The museums opened with a set of safety rules for guests and employees, including social distancing and wearing masks. Last week, the country also reopened beaches, bars and restaurants ahead of the official opening of the tourism sector on May the 15th.
As we have the program, Prince Harry is now the most vocal member of the royal family. First, he had that bombshell interview, you remember, he and his wife, Meghan Markle, had with Oprah in the United States. And now he's revealing aspects of his childhood, sort of like blaming his family. It appears the royal family is not having any of it. While appearing on a podcast by actor Dax Shepard, Prince Harry had compared growing up as a royal to a mixture of the 1998 film The Truman Show and being in a zoo. His father, Prince Charles, refrained from commenting on it when a reporter asked him if he agreed with his son. Prince Harry's comments about the pain and suffering of growing up in the royal family. Well, Charles, the Prince of Wales, was asked the question while visiting protective medical and defence equipment manufacturer BCB International in the Welsh capital, Cardiff.
Sir, do you agree with Prince Harry about the suffering and pain in the family? Have you read his comments?
I guess silence is response for no comment. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.